Good day, I'm Dr. Alan Bogard, and I'm going to be taking you through organizational behavior today, and specifically in that space we're going to be focusing on the topic of motivation. I have a question for you. Does motivation have a price? And while that may be just a difficult question to answer immediately, the fact is money doesn't always buy motivation, but the lack of motivation certainly comes at a cost. There are some anticipated outcomes for today, and specifically the first thing that we're going to be taking away once we've gone through the session today is we'll be able to recognize the importance of different sources of motivation. The case study involves understanding how the use of motivational theories impacts an individual's performance in the workplace. There have been many definitions of motivation that have been espoused through the years, and we all have our own perceptions and views on motivation. Here's one that has worked particularly well for me throughout the years. Motivation is a driving force within each one of us that spurs us on to action, which leads to self-actualization through that which is meaningful to us personally. Let me take a moment to unpack that definition for you. First of all, it's something within us. It's a driving force deep within us that spurs us on to action. So there's this force that is not from external, but it's internal, that leads us and causes us and compels us to action. The action that we take leads to self-actualization, the realization of more and more of our abilities, our talents, our competence, indeed our potential. So it's this driving force spurs us onto action, which leads to self-actualization through that which is meaningful to us personally. So we're really motivated when we are familiar with what is meaningful to us personally. And I guess that the back end of that definition is particularly important because we need to be able to answer the question, what is it that we want? What is meaningful to us personally? And once we're clear about that, we find that we have the energy. We find that within us we have the source of motivation which drives us toward action in that regard. There are a number of motivational theories too that have been bandied about in industry for a number of years. One of them is known as hedonism, and this was perpetuated by Freud and Skinner. And essentially what hedonism says is that pleasure is the ultimate and one and only implicit good. And life is essentially about how much pleasure we can get for ourselves and how little pain we can go through in terms of reaching pleasure as our ultimate goal. So life is really about what serves me, what works for me, and we are motivated in support of that school of thought which suggests and argues that pleasure is the ultimate motivation. Another school of thought, and this is also perpetuated by Freud, but to a lesser degree, more so by Maslow, and that is that self-actualization is paramount in terms of what ultimately motivates us, and self-actualization has to do with once we've satisfied a number of other needs, and I'll talk about those a little later. What is the driving force? What is it? And it's essentially trying to discover more and more of what we can achieve and more of our potential in life. Kelly and May, other motivational theorists, spoke about the fact that life essentially consists, and what we are driven by is a search for meaning. A search for meaning and a reduction in life's uncertainties. So search for meaning says, and is typically answered by questions like, why do I exist? What is my reason for being here? What is my purpose? What is my vision? What is it that I'm gifted and what is it that I'm called to do? And essentially what this theorist is saying, Kelly and May, is that throughout our lives we're in pursuit of this meaning, of understanding more and more of that and making sense of the uncertainty that we sometimes see around us so that we actually can have an anchor and a basis for existing. A very powerful formula or motivation for equation that I have a kind affection for is the following. Motivation equals the expectation of success, the desirability of the reward, plus open communication. I'm going to take a moment to explain that to you. If we are to be motivated, then it makes sense that, and it's easier to be motivated if we expect to succeed. If a team has a particular project or a result that they need to deliver on, if they don't expect to succeed, if it seems so far-fetched, too difficult and just out of reach, then they won't expect to succeed, and then the truth is they won't be able to achieve that. But if the team is positive, and if they can see that there's an opportunity to succeed, and if they're convinced in their own hearts and minds that they are going to succeed, and the expectation is there, that the likelihood of them succeeding is so much greater. And this is possibly best understood within the realm of sport. If a team expects to win, then the likelihood of them winning is there. If they go onto the field and they're already defeated, and they have no expectations about a successful outcome, they're certainly not going to perform. So the first part of that equation is particularly important, the expectation of success. There also needs to be, which is the second part of the equation, the desirability of reward. For argument's sake, a team may expect to succeed, and therefore their performance matches that, but in the back of their minds, they're understanding that what they're going to get out of this does not mean anything to them personally, or it's not meaningful to them personally. So you'll find that if the desirability of the reward it does not match the expectation of success, again it limits the opportunity for promotion, it limits the opportunity for success. I was at a restaurant with a bunch of friends recently, and there was one guy in particular, and what he said to us is that with his pasta, he was very happy to take a tablespoon of chili and just eat it. And we were aghast, and we said, no, don't do that. And he said, no, he wants to. So we said, okay, we just said that we don't want you to do that because we didn't think that you would really do that. But here's the deal. We'll put X amount of pounds on the table. And in fact, we made it 10 pounds. And we said, if you take a tablespoon of chili, we will pay you 10 pounds. And he had the tablespoon of chili in his hands, and he looked at us, and he looked at the chili, and he looked at the pounds, and you could see his mind ticking over. And what he had decided was that the 10 pounds wasn't worth the burn from the chili. So, if we had made it 50 pounds, if the desirability of reward had been more significant, had been something worthwhile, then he probably would have actually taken that tablespoon of chili. So, in terms of the formula, the expectation of success, critical. The desirability of the reward, equally important. Plus, the last part of the formula speaks to the fact that there needs to be open communication. It's one thing communicating to the team and laying out the objectives and creating an expectation of success and making sure that the reward is actually desirable to the individual or to the team. But if there's no ongoing communication, if there's no continual clarification, if there's no discussion around objectives, you'll find that the motivation begins to wane. So already we can see that motivation leaks. And when the environment doesn't support what we're trying to achieve, it has consequences which would not be desirable and would certainly be unhelpful. So the role that we have to play as motivators is to recognize that while we don't motivate the individual, the motivation needs to come from within. We need to make sure that we are manipulating and conditioning and creating an environment that actually supports the anticipated outcomes.